Okay, so welcome to this video. I have finally managed to finish watching the original series, and then in this video I'm planning to do an in-depth comparison between episode 0 of Gquuuux from the movie and the original series. I'm not entirely sure when we'll be getting, or rather when and how we'll be getting the episode 0, as the series officially started airing last night, or technically I think it was morning my time, like 12 hours ago or something as of recording. And we only have episode 1 out, so I'm not actually sure what's happening with episode 0, but I guess we'll find out later. Yeah, to start off with, we have the opening sequence from the first 10 or so episodes of the original series, which gives like a brief overview of the current state of the war, leading up until when the anime starts. And this is basically being reanimated 1-to-1 from the original series into the movie. The only difference is I noticed a difference in translation on the line that mentions both sides living about half the population. Can't exactly remember what it was in the actual movie, as it's been so long. But yeah, I do know it was different. Other than that, the only other translation difference that I've sort of noticed of significance is that the white base in the original translation is referred to as the Trojan horse, and then in the Gquuuux movie it's referred to as a rocking horse. The original Japanese means wooden horse, so I can kind of see how both those translations come from, but they also could have just called it a wooden horse. But I do feel like Trojan horse suits better for a war context, as the rocking horse honestly sounds a bit silly. Yeah, and then we get to battle start. We see the three Zakuus heading towards side 7. One of which in Gquuuux is red, compared to the original, where obviously they're all green, as you can see. And yeah, and this is very closely animated like the original as well, including when one of the Zakuus, when it enters, breaks whatever the hell this thing is off. Yeah, and so the main difference here is that Gene Zaku, who's like a private or something, like a very low rank guy, is in maintenance in Gquuuux. So instead of being him and 2 other dudes, Slender, and I can't remember the other guy's name, Slender's the guy who stays behind at the docking port. It's Char goes instead, so it's Char, Slender, and the guy who was originally leading the team. Yeah, so in the original series, Gene disobeys orders and starts shooting all the mobile suit parts as they're getting loaded and transported. So the guy in charge of the mission, I think's Denim, basically reprimands Gene, and Char also makes a comment about it as well. And then we move on to Gquuuux. So we have Slender stays in the docking port, so Denim and Char go into the colony to do the recon missions. The next minute, Char starts shooting all the mobile suit parts as they're getting loaded. Sort of makes you question the whole thing from the original series. It's just like they're complaining about Gene, right? Then Char just does the same thing. But that's okay. As Denim was basically also starts shooting, Char stops him as he's about to shoot the Gundam, and then he basically decides to try to steal it. And he gets up to it, and it's open, and it's powered on. We then basically get a very similar chain of events of what happened to Amuro with Char, where basically they both get into the suit, they have to fight someone. In Char's case, it's a gun cannon comes running out, and in Amuro's case, it's, I think, I can't remember if it's Gene or Demon's Zaku. But yeah, so they did find some weapons, they discover Vulcans, which Amuro discovers it by reading their manual, and Char discovers it because, I guess, plot armor or something, I don't know. He's an experienced pilot, I guess. He can figure shit out, it's fine. And obviously they run out of ammo, they need to find another weapon, they both find with beam sabers and sort of win those fights. And then also at some point Char makes a comment on how that the Gundam is painted white and it's easy to see, but then later on he proceeds to paint it red, which is also easy to see. Yeah, then we sort of transition into Char walking into the dock where the white base is and basically destroys the bridge with his beam saber. And which follows up with another transition, essentially when they're hidden into space with the stolen white base. So I'm pretty sure it's the white base for Musai are coming out. And then there is an engagement where Char ends up fighting a gun cannon and a Zaku that's been painted up like a crash test dummy, which is kind of neat. Yeah, so in this engagement, Char uses the Gundam hammer, which basically shows that all the inspirations basically from the original series, as the Gundam hammer was actually rendered non-canon by the movies, basically. That's one of the changes Tomino made. He got rid of it. So now we get to my thoughts on how this happened, like what events led to such a drastic change of outcomes. The most obvious thing is Jean not being there, which basically allows Char to be in the position to steal the Gundam. But there's also a lot of factors that happen behind the scenes that we do not see. Like, there's basically no actual confirmation of anything else. But what I think the biggest thing for me, what actually sort of explains everything, is time. I feel like they went in sooner, as by the time Char's destroying the bridge, the captain's on the bridge. And in the original series, when the fighting's happening, he's basically out helping to load everything onto the ship. So that makes me think it happened sooner, which also explains why Amuro wasn't there. As in the original series, by the time the fighting starts, he's in one of the shelters, and then he goes out because basically he doesn't think it's safe to be in there when the fighting's around, stumbles upon a few things, grabs a manual, gets in the Gundam, and then we have what happens. Yeah, so it's basic. I think this is set before Bo has actually managed to get to Amuro to get into the shelters. I think it sort of all works out quite nicely, actually. Like, I think that explains most of the questions. There's also no indication of how long it takes him or how they steal the white base or what happens to the rest of the crew on it and stuff. Like, we generally don't know. There's also, we don't know what happens to Red Zaku that Char gets out of. Do they collect it or is it left behind? There's just kind of a fun theory about how Amuro finds it and uses it, so maybe we see him show up later on in a white Zaku. There's actually some cool art I saw by a Japanese artist who I will link in the description of a white Zaku being piloted by Amuro, which is kind of neat. And then next up we have a time skip. We basically skip over the entire Earth arc, which in the original series takes up over half of the show. Like, I think 20 or something, like probably like 25 or so of the 43-ish episodes. 42 if we get rid of Doran's Island. But Doran's Island is real, so it's 43. Yeah, so what happens is it shows Char basically takes the Gundam back to Zeon. They basically decide to cancel production. Like, one of the companies that makes mobile suits cancels what they're currently working on to develop mobile suits based upon the Gundam. And they also equip it with an experimental psychommune, and they give it some bits, which are called bits in the original series, even though later on they're called funnels, which are basically the automated flying laser beams, basically. And I think this would have been the same Psycommune and bits that would have been destined for Almouth, because that never shows up at all. And there is mention that Garma has left the military, and I'm assuming he's probably also married Icelander. And this is actually really important, as in order for the timeline to actually work out, Garma basically can't have died. Original series, Char basically goes to Earth chasing White Base, and then purposely gets Garma killed as part of his revenge against the Zabi family. And because that no longer happens, I think it allows everything to change, which I will mention. I'll go over at the end of the video, like the significance of him not dying. Then next up we have Char essentially meeting up and teaming up with Charlie and Bull, and they form a special task force that operates out of a White Base, which at this point has been renamed Besodom. Yeah, then in the background we have the Federation forces still managing to take the Solomon. I do feel like there's more preparation time for them to take it, considering that they've done over White Base doing a bunch of stuff. The reason I suspect this is because in the original series there is one Big Zam, which is just a prototype, and then in the movie there are 3 Big Zams, which clearly aren't prototypes at that point. And next up, instead of them attacking a Gquuuux, another space fortress, which honestly they might have done in the background as well, off screen, but basically the Federation have, out of desperation, strapped a bunch of engines to the Solomon and are planning to crash it into the moon base Granada in order to cut off Xeon from your supply lines. And that's the main way they get the supplies from the essentially Xeon homeland colonies into the front lines, basically. Yeah, and then they figure out the only way to actually stop the Solomon from impacting Granada is to plant some explosives in 4 locations, which will help break up the Solomon and make it change course. So they head in, so there's basically 4 teams, Char's leading one of them. And so Char's team succeeds, lays their explosives, and then he sends the rest of his team to deal with, rather help another group with a minefield. And at this point, he enacts his personal plan of that if Granada does fall, both the Federation and the Xeon Empire will basically collapse, as he basically wants the Space Noise to be free from everyone. Also means get more revenge on the Zabi family. But yeah, so he disables the bomb he was with, and then next minute Sailor shows up in a gun cannon. Char can really realize that it's his sister. I think she managed to fire a shot off or collapse the ceiling onto where Char and Red Gundam are. And at this point we have a new type that starts reaching out to Char in a whole bunch of colors and rainbows, which I think is normal, as that's sort of like a projection of a mind is colorful, basically. We've established that in the original series, so it's nothing weird or anything. It's perfectly normal. Yeah, so while this is happening, like Char's starting to detect the other person, like reaching out to him, or at least reaching out to someone in general, and he can hear them. That on Granada they mentioned that one of the test subjects or something on those lines has escaped. And then there's some sort of psychic implosion, and there's basically a gigantic sphere missing from Solomon where Char was. So basically Char's vanished, or Red Gundam's completely vanished, and enough of the Solomon's basically gone that it manages to go off course and misses Granada. So basically they save the day against Char's wishes. And that is basically the end of episode 0. On to my thoughts of how this timeline can actually work out, and some of the theories, plus a few complaints at the end. Now, how this timeline is actually functional, or rather how the original timeline wouldn't be functional in this sort of sense, is that when Gamma dies, it gives his brother Gquuuux the chance to essentially enact his deep down plans of becoming Space Hitler. And sort of rally the rest of Zeon behind him, and essentially the goal turns from independence to destroying the Federation. And if he had his way, he'd destroy all non-probably space noids as well. And in some form of ethnic cleansing. Yeah, then towards the end of the series, his father, Gquuuux, basically asks him, do you know who Hitler is? And his response is, oh, wasn't he some guy from Middle Ages? And at this point, he leaves the room saying that he'll follow the path of Hitler. And as he's leaving the room, Gquuuux basically says, but Hitler loses. And at this point, he basically sneaks out with his ship and a few other ships to basically make peace with the Federation. But doesn't even get a chance, as by that point, Gquuuux basically activates his version of the solar array, which is basically this gigantic, all-powerful weapon that can harness the power of the sun, which the Federation used to take Solomon originally, and destroys like a half to a third of the Federation fleet, as well as his father's flagship. Yeah, which does lead to Chrysalia killing him later on, which is entirely justified. Whether or not Gamma dying actually drove him to wanting to destroy the Federation, or he all deep down wanted to and just gave him an excuse, I'm not actually sure. But by Gamma actually living, it means that it is possible for the Federation to essentially sue for peace, and then Zeon to basically be like, yes, we're free, and that's the end of the war. Because if Gamma had died in this essentially timeline, it would have just gone to the end. Because assuming Federation couldn't have actually fought and invaded the homeland, I think that Zeon would have just kept going until Federation was no more. And I do feel like a lot of other stuff would have changed as well. So I do assume the Federation is still around in some form in the actual series, which we might find out about it later. And everyone's probably just coexisting in some form or another. And then on to some theories I had. There is the question of who the new type who was reaching out to Char was. And because there's basically no mention of Lala at all in the beginning, I do feel like potentially, because I think Char finds her and sends her to an institute to essentially look after her and develop her new type powers. I think that may not have happened in this timeline, as Char doesn't seem to know who she is, or at least no mention of her, so maybe she was taken by Chrysalia or something, which explains why she's in Granada. And she's also the only new type I can think of in the original series who's powerful enough to get all that rainbow and actually do that sort of communication. I don't think any of the other powerful new types would even be born then either. Because Pyrrha wouldn't be born. Or she maybe should be like 0 or 1 or something. That's why I think it might be Lala. We might find out though. I think that's going to be a thing. Are we going to find out? We might. The another interesting thing is how basically the Federation seems to have moved into using the gun cannon as its mainline mobile suit, which does sort of make sense as the GM is based on the data they've collected from Gundam, and without that data they wouldn't have actually built it, so basically settling for gun cannon, which is essentially as good as a GM or better, but more expensive, if that makes sense. And now for the complaints. Zeon in the original series is actually very self-sabotaging. You'll have situations where the leader of a group will die, and then the next episode, everyone under that guy's command then does a suicide mission and gets themselves killed. They were very good at it. It happened multiple times. And also like kind of how Dozel basically fought to the end until he died at Solomon as well. Why I assumed he definitely died in the this series timeline as well. And it's got to a point, I'm not actually sure if I think, even without Amuro and Gundam on the Federation side, I generally don't think Zeon would be able to win the war anyway, even though it does seem like they did. Like, that's something what I find a bit questionable, but it's fine for storytelling purposes, I think. As generally, I don't think Char was actually doing that much with the Gundam, with Zeon. And another thing is, I actually don't think Char was developed enough as a new type to make the most out of a Psychommune in bits. Because in the original series, he actually struggles to use the Zeon. And technically that is against Amuro, who is, like, at this point, a very powerful new type. But it's just like, so I guess against just normal people, maybe it's actually useful, but then against, like, if Amuro did show up in a White Zaku, honest to God, if we saw Amuro at, like, end of the first series in a White Zaku versus Char, I think Amuro would still probably win, even though he's just in a Zaku. That's kind of how insane it is. Like, actually how different they are. So sure, at the start of the series, Char is more experienced as a pilot, right? By the end of the series, Char's exhibiting some signs of being a new type. He's still a good pilot, but Amuro is also a good pilot and is a very powerful new type. And the last thing I actually have kind of a big issue with is there's absolutely no mention of the core fighter, which is an integral part of the RX-78. Like, without the core fighter, it's not an RX-78. And technically it's also an integral part of the gun cannon as well. And the fact they haven't mentioned them at all actually generally makes me think they've sort of omitted it from the design, which I'll probably complain about quite a lot when I do get around to talking about the designs. But there might be a slight chance that it comes up in the series, but I honestly doubt it. Would be really cool though. And yeah, so that's basically it. These are my thoughts on the beginning versus the original series. As the series is now currently airing, I think I'll be doing a review of each episode a day or two after they come out. And once it's all actually over and done with, and I'll then start working on my thoughts on the actual designs, as I think it will be better to do it once everything's done, as we get to see everything they throw at us. And yeah, thanks for coming everyone. Make sure you like and subscribe, and also leave a comment if you have any thoughts, like have you seen the beginning, what do you think about my comparisons, what do you think, do you have your own comparisons to make? And yeah, I'll see you guys all next time. Thank you for coming.